Yesterday, Sayadaw explained the example where the rupa, materiality cause, is giving rise to nama, effect. And Sayadaw gave the most obvious example. The elements, the elements which are materiality and mentality are arising in combination. Dhatu are the elements that bear their own intrinsic nature. Each of the nama rupa has its own unique nature, and it is said that each of these nama rupa elements bear their own intrinsic nature. In Pali, it is called dhatu, and in other languages as well, there will be certain words explaining the word dhatu. In the hearing, there are elements arising in combination in the hearing. There is the ear sensitivity, which is the receptor element, the sound waves, which are the striker element, hearing consciousness, hearing contact, and hearing feeling are the ignition element. And in the hearing, these elements are arising in combination at the same time. And one should be noting in general as hearing when hearing takes place. One cannot set apart, or one cannot divide apart these elements, such as this is the ear sensitivity, this is the sound waves, the striker element, this is the ignition element. But one should be mindful of the whole hearing, which are the combination of these elements. One should just note it in general as hearing. By noting hearing, it is also the truth. It is called samudhi satya. Based on what really exists, there is the designation of the word based on what really exists. So it is called as hearing. It is the usage that arises based on what really exists. So hearing is the usage when hearing takes place. One should be mindful by noting it as hearing, and one should not deliberately divide, or one should not deliberately analyze as this is the striker element, this is the receptor element, or this is the ignition element. One cannot do so. By noting just as hearing with sustained mindfulness, the mindfulness will be sustained. The mind will fall calm, collected on the object. So one should note hearing with sustained mindfulness, so that the mind falls calm, collected on the object. And one should just note it as a whole, just as hearing. Noting hearing continuously, there will be the power of effort, there will be the power of mindfulness, there will be the power of concentration. In Pali, it is called bala. Bala means power. The mental power of effort, mindfulness, and concentration will be cultivated by noting, hearing continuously, so that the mental power will grow from small to big, from less to many. Each moment of these mental powers, effort, mindfulness, and concentration will not seem as strong, but if these mental power, effort, mindfulness, and concentration are continuous, then there will be a big energy of these mental power. So one needs to cultivate these mental powers of effort, mindfulness, and concentration, so that one will cultivate knowledge. So whatever object that arises, one should be mindful of the object as soon as the object arises. So one should be noting the object with ardent effort, full of alertness, readiness in the noting. As much the mindfulness is sustained on the object, the mind falls calm, collected on the object. And by being mindful, moment by moment, minute after minute, there will be countless moments of cultivating mindfulness and concentration. So one should practice by noting the object with aim and effort. So one has to aim and direct the noting mind onto the object so that the noting mind comes face to face or direct with the object. When the noting mind is face to face or direct with the object, one will discern the elements that exist in the hearing. So when the striker element strikes the receptor, the ignition takes place. By being mindful of hearing, one will discern very clearly. In order to discern very clearly, one needs to note with aim and effort. Whenever one sees, whenever one hears, whenever one smells, whenever one tastes, whenever one touches, whenever one knows. Whatever object that arises at the sixth sense door should be noted and observed. So every time the object arises, such as seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and knowing, one should be mindful of all these objects. There should not be any time for rest. Even though the person is resting, but the defilements will not take any rest at all. If there is lack of mindfulness, if the person does not observe the object, kilesa defilements will enter the mind. And not being mindful, the person will not discern the receptor element, striker element, or the ignition element. And there will be ignorance. If there is lack of mindfulness, there will be delusion, and there will also be lack of moral shame and lack of moral fear from the unwholesomeness, and there will also be restlessness. So at least these defilements, delusion, lack of moral shame, lack of moral fear, restlessness arise the moment the person misses or fails to note the object. So every time one misses or fails to note the object, every time when there is lack of mindfulness, these defilements will arise. And by being mindful, the defilements will be removed. So in order to discern the striker element, receptor element, and the ignition element, one should be cultivating viriya, sati, and samadhi, efforts, mindfulness, and concentration, which are very precious in the practice. Cultivating viriya, sati, and samadhi, efforts, mindfulness, and concentration, samadhi kanda, concentration group, will be cultivated so that it will grow from less to many. When it is said that one should note hearing as soon as the hearing takes place, it doesn't mean that one should be noting every hearing. When one is doing sitting meditation, noting rising and falling of the abdomen, or when one is doing walking meditation, lifting, moving, and placing of the foot, one should be noting the object, rising, falling, lifting, moving, placing, with aim and effort, so that mindfulness will be concurrent with the object. When noting rising, falling, or lifting, moving, placing, and if one notices the hearing, but if the mind is not distracted by the hearing, then one does not need to note the hearing. So if the attention does not go fully onto the hearing, then one does not need to note the hearing, but one has to focus one's mind on the primary object, rising, falling, or lifting, moving, and placing. So it means that while noting the primary object, when hearing takes place, if the mind does not get distracted by the hearing, if the mind does not get distracted from noting the primary object, one has to continue noting the primary object. If the person has to note the hearing, one might ask, should I direct my mind onto the place where the sound is coming from? It is not so. When hearing takes place, one should note where the striker element strikes the ear base. So one should be focusing one's attention on where the hearing is taking place, where the striker strikes the receptor element. While noting the primary object, when the sound waves strike the ears, and if the mind gets distracted by the hearing, one should note hearing immediately. So as soon as the attention go onto the hearing, one should note it as hearing and hearing. By noting hearing, it will just be mere hearing. It will not continue further. In the hearing, there are the receptor element, the striker element. They are the cause. Hearing consciousness, hearing contact, and hearing feeling are the effect. So one should be mindful of the hearing. The hearing consciousness is not wholesome and it is not unwholesome. Hearing consciousness is neither wholesome nor unwholesome. It is a resultant consciousness which arises as a result of one's past deed. As soon as hearing takes place, as soon as the mind gets distracted by the hearing, or as soon as one's attention goes onto the hearing, one should notice as hearing, so that the mindfulness will gain the upper hand. If a person is not a yogi, or if the yogi is flippant in the practice, then there can be a quick response based on what he or she hears. When there is a quick response on what he or she hears, it shows that the person is not noting or not practicing with sustained mindfulness. If the person does not note hearing right away, then there will be lack of mindfulness and thoughts will arise connected with the hearing. If it is a pleasant sound that the person likes, then there will be greed. If there is the kind of sound that the person does not like, then the person gets upset and dissatisfied. For example, when a yogi is doing sitting meditation, when he or she hears the neighbor yogi, then rather than noting it as hearing right away, rather than being mindful of the hearing, the person is thinking, it goes again, he or she is making this noise again. Every time I sit, he or she is making such noise. So, in this way, the dislike, the anger arise. While doing sitting, when one hears some kind of noise from the neighbor yogi, such as coughing, or opening and closing of the eyes, opening and closing of the door, rather than noting it as hearing right away, the person tends to get angry, or there can be thoughts connected with the hearing. So in this way, defilements arise based on hearing. If the person is not able to note hearing right away. So based on the sound that the person hears, there can either be greed or anger. One gets upset with what he or she hears. So it shows that the mindfulness does not gain the upper hand. It shows that the person does not note hearing right away. It happens mostly to yogis who do not have patience. So Sayadaw says, yogis should be patient. One should mind one's own practice. There has been instruction and guidance that as soon as there is hearing, as soon as the mind goes onto the hearing, one should note right away as hearing. If the person is not practicing according to the guidance, then as soon as one hears, then one feels angry, upset with what he or she hears. The other yogi might not be deliberately doing the noise, but it is important that yogi should not be yogi should not be minding of what he or she likes. one should have wise attention. There should be yoniso manasikara. One should have wise attention. When one has to deal with others, when one has to do the group sitting, one should not only be wanting one's own likes or wishes. One should be patient. It is the duty of the yogi to be patient. And when one hears something, whatever the noise is, whatever the sound is, one should note hearing right away. If not, then the person is not endowed with the quality of sovajasata. Then there will be problem. The person gets upset with what he or she hears. So it is very important to be patient. If the person gets upset, angry, it shows that it is the person who has the weakness. So in order not to let it happen, one should have patience and one should note hearing as soon as the hearing takes place. If one does not note hearing right away on these elements, then there will not be effort in the noting. Mindfulness will not be sustained, and samadhi, concentration, will not arise. So there will be lack of viriya, sati and samadhi. There will be lack of effort, mindfulness and concentration. At the moment samadhi khanda, the concentration group arises, the priyuthana kilesa, obsessive form of defilements, will not have chance to arise. But if there is lack of viriya, sati and samadhi, if there is lack of effort, mindfulness and concentration, then the obsessive defilements arise. So one should note hearing right away as soon as hearing takes place with aim and effort. Rather than noting hearing right away, anger arises and one gets ruined. So long as viriya, sati, samadhi, so long as effort, mindfulness and concentration is absent, then the defilements arise. When effort, mindfulness and concentration are present, the defilements cannot agitate the mind. If there is lack of viriya, sati and samadhi, the defilements arise. Not only that there will be dosa, anger, but there is also moha, delusion, not seeing the flaws of this anger. And when this happens, there is ahirika and anuttapa, lack of moral shame and lack of moral fear from these defilements. As the person is not practicing respectfully, there arises dosa, anger, and connected with the hearing, not only anger, but also moha, delusion, and ahirika and anuttapa, lack of moral shame and lack of moral fear. So it is a pity to let these defilements arise by lack of mindfulness. If the anger arises continuously for 1 minute, there will be 1 minute of losing the samadhi khanda, losing the concentration group. And it shows that the person is not practicing according to the guidance and instruction. It shows that the person is not practicing accurately or precisely. So one needs the quality of sovajasata one needs to follow the guidance and instruction as according to the teachings of the Buddha. So it is important to practice respectfully, meticulously, to be patient as well. Being patient, one gains benefits himself or herself, as well as it is beneficial for the surrounding. By lack of mindfulness, if anger or dissatisfaction arise connected with the hearing, or if anger or dissatisfaction arise on the person who is making the noise, one should be mindful of this anger right away. Sadho samva citta, sadosa cittanti pajanati. If the angry mind arises, one should be mindful of it as angry. If there is anger, note it as angry. If one is upset, note it as upset. If there is dissatisfaction, note it as dissatisfied, and so on. So as soon as the anger arises, note it right away as angry, so that the anger will get weaker and weaker, and eventually the anger goes away. Vita dosa va citta, vita dosa cittanti pajanati. When the mind is free from anger, when anger is removed, when the mind is free from anger, be mindful that it is free from anger. So in this way, if anger arises, noting it as angry right away, then one makes a profit out of a loss by being mindful of the anger. But on the other hand, if the person lets the anger go on, then the anger will be rooted deeply, and there will be more upsetness, and there will be more degree of anger. Not to let it happen, one should be mindful of the angry mind as angry, so that there will be citta-nupassana, the contemplation of the mind. For the yogi who has patience and forbearance, notes objects without missing, without failing. Even though the undesirable object arises, one notes it so that anger does not have chance to arise. So one should prevent the anger from arising. Just as the fire needs to be prevented, in the same way, one should prevent the anger fire from arising. There should be rakha, protection, avarana, blockage, away from defilements, so that dosa, anger, has no chance to enter the mind, so that the mind is safe and secure. When the fire breaks out, one should immediately extinguish the fire. So when anger arises, as soon as the anger arises, one should extinguish the anger right away by noting it as angry. One should not let the anger to arise continuously, just as one should not let the fire to continue to burn. So just as one needs to prevent the fire, and one needs to put out the fire right away, immediately, in the same way, one should prevent the defilements, lobha, dosa, moha, from arising by way of Satipatthana practice. The defilement fire should be prevented from arising. If the defilement fire arises, one should extinguish it right away by being mindful, and one should understand the benefits of being mindful. One should cherish and value the mindfulness. There should be patience and forgiveness, and one will have a good control of oneself, and one should keep and maintain the control that one has over oneself. Through the practice later on, it will not be difficult to keep the mind controlled, but one's mind is automatically controlled by being mindful. Even though the objects are desirable or undesirable, one will not have defilements entering the mind, as the person is constantly mindful of whatever object that arises. In this way, there should be prevention of the defilements from arising, and if the defilements arise, one should extinguish it right away. And in order to do so, one should always be active, alert, ready in noting the object, so that the path of defilements will be blocked, and the defilements will not enter the mind, and thus the mind will be calm, collected. The mind will not be burnt by the lobha fire, dosa fire. The mind will not be burnt by these defilements, and the mind becomes calm and collected. Whatever object that arises, one should note it right away. If one hears something, if one hears any kind of noise, one should note hearing right away. When viriya, sati and samadhi, effort, mindfulness and concentration are continuous, then there will just be mere hearing. And once that's noted as hearing, there will just be mere hearing. One discerns the nama rupa, cause and effect, by noting hearing. By noting hearing, one discerns the receptor element, striker element, and the ignition element, and one will discern distinctly between nama and rupa, cause and effect. And in order to discern the nama rupa, cause and effect, one should be mindful of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and so on, without missing, without failing. And this will be all for today.